Well, good morning, Team GS1. You did it. You did it. You made it. You're on the fourth day, all right? And it's the first session of the fourth day, and you're still eager to learn. I'm impressed. I'm deeply impressed. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Tom Woods. I work at the World Bank in Washington, D.C., and I'm really excited to be here and excited to talk about a region that I love very much. For the next hour, we're going to be speaking about Africa. How many people have been to Africa? Can I see a show of, wow. You know, in the United States, not many people travel to Africa for vacation or for work, so this is a very global crowd. That's impressive. One fact that you might not know about Africa, though, or maybe you do, given that you've all traveled there, is it's a huge continent, okay, and it's made up of 54 different countries. So in the United States, when we talk about Africa, people seem to think it's like one place, but it's 54 different countries, and it's vast. And it represents about 1.3 billion people, which is 17% of the global population. Okay, so we're talking about an important region with some of the fastest growing economies in the world, and certainly some of the fastest growing populations in the world. I think an important consideration to kind of frame up this discussion this morning is that Africa is changing very quickly. And we had this discussion a bit earlier. The way that they're adopting technology gives me a lot of encouragement that they could potentially leapfrog, and that pharmaceutical serialization could basically catapult them into the digital age very quickly. One good example of that is, I call people in Africa all the time, and I can't remember the last time I called somebody on a landline. I don't know if they even still exist. Everybody went straight to cell phones, and now they have smartphones. And so that's a great example of how the African continent could take technology like traceability, skip a few steps, and begin to implement. And I have to tell you, this change can't come fast enough. And why do I say that? We're here to cast kind of an inspirational view of what we hope to do in Africa, but I want to tell you how important it is. Africa is suffering, and it's suffering as a result of falsified and substandard medicines that kill people. So traceability of pharmaceuticals may be a helpful thing. It may strengthen supply chains and integrity in some regions. In Africa, it can be life and death. So that's very important to keep in mind about what we're doing here and what we're discussing today. Africa is also a little bit different from other regions, to the extent that the traditional way of doing healthcare through the private sector doesn't exist as much in Africa, and many times we see partnerships with aid organizations, multilateral development and health financing organizations. So that's a little bit different, and we need to unpack that a little bit to understand kind of how traceability fits into this supply chain integrity question in Africa. So let me get rolling here. Oh, that's me. So at the World Bank, I chair this entity called the Global Steering Committee. And it's really a voluntary coalition of all the big health financing and development organizations that procure literally billions of dollars of medicine every year and distribute it throughout the world, and in many places, less developed countries like those in Africa. And we have two of the big players here today. I'm excited to say that we have the United States Agency for International Development, USAID. I promised I wouldn't use too many acronyms because you have yours and we have ours. But so USAID is in the house. We also have the Global Fund for HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. So this Global Steering Committee for Quality Assurance of Health Products, as we call it, is a coalition that also has a private sector arm to it. So we want to make sure that we're getting private sector input to everything that we're thinking about in terms of how we relate to supply chain integrity in Africa. And among the entities that you see represented here on the screen as members of this Global Steering Committee, there is strong consensus that traceability is the way to go, and it's going to bring enormous benefit to Africa. Why do we think that Africa has to join the world in terms of implementing traceability? Well, simply put, if the rest of the world sees the benefit, then Africa cannot be left behind. Traceability hits a really important aspect, a weakness, a challenge in Africa, and that's supply chain integrity. And you heard me talk about why that's so important. So the benefits could be absolutely enormous toward overall health system strengthening and patient safety. And it'll also help the aid organizations kind of get our ducks in a row and protect our own supply chains. So there's a dual purpose for our engagement. Everybody's going to win from traceability, everyone, except maybe the criminals, and we don't want them to win. Now, the last few years, we've been essentially setting the table for the Africa traceability revolution that we think is coming. We've had two very successful GS1 conferences. The first one was in Ethiopia a few years ago, and the most successful one was in Nigeria just in September, and that was in Lagos. And again, we had just amazing participation, and really set the stage for lots of advancement. And the really important thing about to understand about this, and I think I've got a few of these points up here, is that everybody's moving in this direction. So if you're a global manufacturer, or if you're a local manufacturer in Africa, you have to be getting on board. So we're kind of pushing on an open door, as we like to say. Which brings me to what I view as really the most important aspect, the most important consideration about rolling out traceability across the African continent, and that is African ownership and African leadership. Without it, we fail. It's absolutely essential. So that's why I'm very excited that we had African medicines regulatory agencies literally pledging themselves, and this was the event, pledging themselves to pursuit of traceability. And we're very fortunate that one of the leading torchbearers for that historic call to action, signed by some 25 African countries, is with us this morning. Director General, you're a friend to many in this room, and we're so glad that you're with us to help this international audience understand why you think traceability is important for Nigeria, but also why you think it's important for the African continent. So let me turn the podium over to the Director General of NAFDAC, the Agency for Food and Drug Administration in Nigeria, my friend, Professor Adeyeye.